An obese girl was given to a Hell's Angel as punishment. That's how her nightmare began. Handed over like property in a smoky bar full of laughter and rain outside that wouldn't stop falling. But when the biker they called the Quiet One took her hand, something unexpected happened. He didn't hurt her. He protected her. In his rundown cabin, she saw a Bible with his name inside, proof that this man of danger once preached hope. And as thunder roared over the desert, two broken souls realized they were both prisoners, one of shame, one of guilt. But when the gang comes hunting and the past claws its way back, mercy might cost them everything. Can a woman who's only known ridicule learn she was never a punishment at all? Or will loving the wrong man get her killed before she ever sees what she's worth? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The bar lights flickered like tired eyes. It was near midnight, and the storm outside beat the roof with hard, steady hands. Amber Lee wiped the last wet ring off a table and stacked the chairs with quiet care. Her apron smelled like grease and onions. Her feet hurt. She told herself she would soak them when she got home. She told herself she would try not to cry tonight. The front door blew open. Rain and noise came in with a rush of leather and boots. A group of bikers pushed through, laughing too loud, bringing the smell of oil and wet denim. Amber did not look up right away. She knew the sound of that laugh. Rick's. It was the same laugh he used when he lied, the same laugh he used when he broke things he could not fix. Rick moved first, a mean grin on his face and liquor on his breath. He slapped the bell by the counter as if calling for a show. "Look who's still here," he said, and swung his arm wide. "Little Amber Lee, Queen of the Mop." A few men chuckled. Some looked away, bored. Others watched her like a cat watches a bird. Amber kept her voice even. "We're closed in 10 minutes, she said. "Kitchen's done. I can pour drinks, but no food." Rick leaned on the bar and looked her up and down with a slow, ugly smile. "No food?" he said. "Strange. I thought you never said no to that." Someone snorted. Another man, thin, sharp, with eyes like hooks, made a show of checking his watch. "Viper says we celebrate," he called out. "Big night, big man, big joke." He thumped the table. The others echoed it. Amber's hands tightened. She breathed in. She breathed out. She had learned to do that. Breathe in, breathe out, keep moving. She poured 2 beers and set them down without shaking. She felt every stare like a hand on her back. The man called Viper stood near the center of the room. He did not laugh. He did not move much. He watched. He had the kind of stillness that made other men stand straighter. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Enough," he said. The room hushed. He turned his head toward the back corner booth. "Gabe." Amber did not know the man at first. He sat alone, half in shadow, a leather jacket folded on the seat beside him. A big man, broad shoulders, beard rough as sand. His eyes were tired and the color of storm water. He looked up when Viper said his name, then he looked down again at the glass in his hand. Viper gave a thin smile. "You've been quiet," he said. "Too quiet. We got to remind you how our family works." Rick turned toward the booth, eager for more. "Yeah, remind him," he said. "Man's no fun." Viper flicked his fingers. "We give you something," he said, "to keep you busy." He lifted his chin at Amber. The room seemed to tilt. "Take her home." For a second, no one moved. Then the words spread like fire. A few men laughed, a few swore. Rick slapped the bar and doubled over, giddy at his own cleverness. "That's rich," he crowed. "That's perfect. Give the quiet man some noise." Amber's mouth went dry. Her hands froze on the wet cloth. She felt it then, the old heat of shame that climbed her neck like a rash. She looked at Gabe. He did not move. He did not smile. He did not reach for her. He sat there like a rock in a river, letting the noise break around him. "I'm not a thing," Amber said, voice small but steady. She did not plan to speak. The words came anyway. She set the cloth down and stood straighter. "I'm a person. You don't get to—" Rick grabbed her wrist over the counter, hard enough to make her gasp. "You don't tell us what we get," he hissed. His fingers dug deep. "You don't tell anyone anything." Before she could pull back, the big man in the booth was there. She had not seen him rise or cross the room. He was just suddenly there, filling the space with his calm. He put a hand on Rick's forearm. Not rough. Firm. "Let go," he said. Rick yanked, but the big man did not budge. He did not squeeze. He only stood and waited. Rick's face went red. He let go and stumbled back, muttering. Gabe turned to Amber. "Get your things," he said. His voice was quiet. He looked at her, not through her. "I'll walk you out." "I'm not going with you," she said. She wanted it to sound brave. It came out thin. He nodded once, as if she had simply told him the time. "I understand," he said, "but he'll wait outside." He tipped his head toward Rick without looking. "You won't make it to your car without trouble." Amber swallowed. Her keys felt heavy in her pocket. Rain pounded on the roof like drums. She stared up at the big man. He did not stare back. He turned and faced Viper. "Not her," he said. It was soft, but clear. Viper lifted a brow. "You think you say no to me?" he asked. He smiled, a clean white flash in a tired face. "I said take her. You take her." "I don't hurt women," the big man said. Viper's eyes thinned. "Nobody asked you to," he said, and tipped his head, amused. "Unless you want to." Something cold moved in Amber's chest. Words failed her. The storm filled the silence for a moment. Then the jukebox clicked on by itself and played a sad old song. It made the room feel smaller. Gabe did not answer Viper. He took off his jacket and held it out to Amber, not looking at her face. She stared at the jacket and did not move. The leather was soft at the collar and scarred at the sleeves. It smelled like rain and old roads. "You'll be cold," he said. "It's a long walk to the car." She waited for the joke that would cut. It did not come. She took the jacket with shaking hands and slid into it. It was too big. It fell past her hips and hugged her like a shield. Rick laughed again, closer now. "Look at that," he said. "Little Queen and her king." Viper smiled without joy. "Walk her out," he told Gabe, and made a small flick with his fingers that meant this talk was finished. He turned his back and picked up a glass. Gabe led the way to the door. He did not touch Amber. He did not look back to see if she followed. She did. The jacket was warm. The rain hit her face and woke her like a slap. The wind bit. The parking lot was a wide pool of black water. At the edge of the lot, under a broken streetlight, sat a big black motorcycle. It looked like a quiet animal waiting for a whistle. Gabe swung a leg over and settled with ease. He offered her a spare helmet. "It will be faster than your car," he said. "Safer." Amber stared at the helmet. She turned her head and saw figures moving at the bar windows, forms behind glass, watching. She knew she could say no. She knew she could run. She also knew Rick would follow, and he would not be alone. She took the helmet. It felt heavy in her hands, like a choice. She put it on and fumbled with the strap until Gabe reached and steadied it with gentle fingers. He stepped back at once. "Hold tight," he said. "Lean when I lean." She climbed onto the back of the bike and tried to make herself small. Her knees pressed against the sides of his jacket. She kept her hands to herself for 1 second, too. Then the bike rumbled to life, and fear pushed her palms to his ribs. His body was warm and solid and still. He did not flinch. They rolled out into the rain. The front tire cut a clean line through the water. The streetlight slid away, and the bar fell behind them like a bad picture in a rear-view mirror. Amber lowered her head to the wind. The night opened in front of them, dark and wide. The ride did not feel like flying. It felt like folding into a storm and letting it carry you. The road hissed under the tires. The wind slapped, then softened when the big man angled his shoulders to shield her. She felt small and safe and scared at the same time. Her mind ran through everything she should have said and did not say. It ran through every joke she had learned to use, like armor. None of them fit. They passed the last gas station, then a row of trailers with one light on in each, then the empty stretch where the town gave up and the desert began. The land opened on both sides like dark ocean. Saguaros stood like tall men in prayer. Now and then, lightning sketched their shapes in blue-white lines. Amber's teeth chattered, then settled as the jacket gathered her heat. She tightened her grip when the bike tipped into a curve. She felt the big man breathe. In, out, steady. She matched her breath to his. It calmed her. The thought came like a small light. I am not a joke. I am not a thing. I am a person on a road, in a storm, with a man who did not laugh. They turned off the highway onto a narrow road that climbed into the low hills. The houses thinned. The dark grew kinder. The rain eased to a fine mist that tasted of dust and iron. The bike slowed at a mailbox half bent, then pulled into a gravel drive. The cabin at the end of the drive was small and square, with a deep porch and a yellow porch light that made a warm circle on the step. A tin rooster spun on the roof and squeaked. The yard was crowded with odds and ends, an old swing frame with no swing, a rusted bicycle, a stack of wood that leaned like a tired man. The place looked worn, but cared for, like a coat kept after the elbows went thin. Gabe killed the engine. The sudden quiet made the crickets brave. Rain ticked in the trees. Amber took off the helmet and tried to hand it back with steady hands. He took it and nodded toward the door. You can take the bed, he said. I'll take the couch. She blinked. I'm not... She did not know how to finish. She was not what? She was not his girl. She was not his problem. She was not an answer to anything. He seemed to hear the rest. His mouth made the ghost of a smile. You're safe here, he said. For tonight. He paused. I don't run a show like theirs. She followed him up the steps. He wiped his boots on the mat, and she did the same, an old habit learned in small places. Inside, the cabin smelled like cedar and coffee. The living room held a couch with a patched blanket, a scarred coffee table, and a heavy bookshelf lined with old paperbacks, and a few framed photos turned face down. A pair of children's drawings hung crooked on the wall, stick people under a sun with too many rays. Her breath caught, but she said nothing. The kitchen was a one-man galley with a window over the sink. A mug sat by the faucet with a chip in its lip. On the counter lay a small, worn Bible with a leather cover, the kind you carry until it shapes to your hand. It had a name pressed in gold in the corner. She could not read it from here. Gabe hung his jacket on a peg and set the helmets by the door. He stood for a second as if choosing his next move, then lifted a kettle and filled it. Tea? He asked. Or coffee? Tea, she said. Her voice sounded soft and far away. Please. He set a pan on the stove and cracked 2 eggs with more care than men often used. He moved like someone who had learned to do small things right when the big things broke. Amber stood with her hands at her sides and felt the room settle around her. I'll get you something dry to wear, he said, and left the kitchen for the hall. The house gave a little sigh as he went, wood answering weight. Amber reached out and touched the corner of the Bible. The leather was smooth where a thumb had rested again and again. She drew her hand back when he returned with a folded shirt and soft sweatpants. "They'll be big," he said, "but warm." "Thank you," she said. The words felt thin beside what he had done. He nodded, not eager, not shy, and aimed a thumb down the hall. "Bathroom's on the left." She changed and hung her wet clothes over the tub. The mirror was spotted. She looked at her own face in it and felt that old ache. She pressed 2 fingers to the glass in a small, silly comfort. "You're okay," she told her reflection. "You made it." The words fogged the mirror and vanished. Back in the kitchen, he set a plate on the table. Toast, eggs, soft, a sliced apple, browned a bit at the edges where the air had touched it, but sweet. He slid a steaming mug toward her. A teabag string hung over the side with a paper tag that said chamomile. "Eat," he said. "You'll feel better." She did. She felt the warm food move through her like a balm. She felt the tea loosen a tight place in her chest. She wanted to ask about the drawings. She wanted to ask why his eyes looked like they had seen a fire and never quite healed. She did not ask yet. He took the couch when the dishes were done. She tried to help, but he shook his head. "You sleep," he said. "I'll keep watch a while." "What if they come here?" she asked. His jaw shifted once. "Then I'll tell them no." "You think they'll listen?" "I think I will not give them a choice." He said it in a way that did not brag. It simply told the ground what his feet would do upon it. Amber walked to the small bedroom. The bed was made with a blue quilt that had a crooked star in the center. She ran her hand over the stitches and had a sense of a woman with a patient needle, working by a window. She lay down and pulled the quilt up to her chin. The night hummed. The storm moved further off and rolled low and lazy along the hills. From the couch came the sound of a man trying not to move so a guest could sleep. Springs creaked, a breath held, a sigh let go. She listened until the sounds became a kind of lullaby. She told herself not to think. She thought anyway. She thought of Rick's grip on her wrist and the way this man's hand had settled over it, not crushing, only stopping harm. She thought of Viper's eyes, flat and hungry. She thought of the Bible with the gold name and the children's sun with too many rays. Sometime in the soft hours, she woke to a murmur. She kept still and listened. The big man talked in a low voice to someone not in the room. The words came slow, like feet finding a path in the dark. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said, "but I can keep her safe tonight. You know their minds. Keep them away." Silence. Then, softer, the name that bent the air around it. "I'm sorry." He breathed in. Out. "I'm still sorry." Amber closed her eyes. The apology stayed in the room like a scent. She felt a strange peace then, as if sorrow and safety could sit in the same chair. She slept again. Near dawn, the sky paled at the edges like paper ready for the first mark. The rain had slowed to a whisper. The kettle clicked once as the heat inside it cooled. Somewhere, a truck started, rattled, and went, leaving a long, empty after-sound the desert knew well. Gabe rose and eased stiff muscles. He tucked the blanket back around himself so the quilt in the bedroom would not stir. He moved to the window and watched the road. 2 sets of headlights rolled by and did not turn in. He watched until the quiet had a shape again. When Amber woke, the house smelled like coffee. She sat up and touched the quilt as if to say goodbye, even though she was still there. She found a comb by the sink and used it. The little acts mattered. He looked up when she stepped into the kitchen. He had lines of fatigue bracketing his mouth, but his eyes were clear. "Morning," he said. "There's time to get you home before the day crowd starts up." She wrapped her arms around herself. "If that's a good idea," she said. "We'll use a back way," he answered. He poured her coffee into the chipped mug and slid it to her. "Drink. Then we'll go." She sipped and felt warmth move through the cold places. She stared at the photos turned face down along the shelf. She felt a pull to set one upright. She did not. She set the mug down. "Thank you," she said, "for last night." He nodded. "I don't hurt women," he said again, as if reminding himself of a vow. The words had weight. They sounded like a stone laid where a wall had fallen. They walked out to the porch. The clouds had torn open to a pale blue sheet. Puddles held little pieces of sky. He handed her the helmet and the jacket. She put them on. The leather warmed where it touched her skin. As he swung his leg over the bike, a low growl rose at the far end of the road. Another bike, then another. The sound built, one note on another, until the porch boards hummed. Gabe's head turned. His jaw set. "They're early," he said. Amber's stomach dropped. She looked at the path through the mesquite that led away from the driveway and wondered if her legs could carry her to the hills. He seemed to read her thoughts. "Get on," he said. "We'll be faster." She climbed on and clutched him. He started the engine, and the sound of it rose to meet the sound of the others. Two storms staring at each other. Over a dry wash. He leaned close, voice steady by her ear. "Whatever happens," he said, "I will keep you safe." She nodded, even though he could not see. The first of the other bikes rounded the bend, wet chrome flashing. Gabe kicked the stand up. Gravel spat. The front wheel found its line. They shot forward into the morning, into the thin new light and the last silver threads of rain, with the road unrolling like a promise, and the engines behind them howling for the past. And the past, for once, did not get to choose. Rain still clung to the roads when the sun came up. Gabe rode until the clouds broke into light, the wind drying Amber's hair beneath the helmet. She didn't ask where they were going. The hum of the motorcycle was answer enough. Away. Away from laughter and bruised pride. Away from being a joke in a room full of men. When they finally turned onto a gravel lane and stopped, the engine clicked as it cooled. The cabin from last night sat small against the hills, and the quiet made Amber's chest ache. She climbed off the bike and stood with her arms crossed, unsure whether to thank him or demand he take her home. Gabe shut off the ignition and looked toward the trees. "You can rest here?" he said. His voice was calm, the kind of calm that made people trust him without meaning to. "No one will come here for a while." Amber followed him inside. The house smelled of pine and old coffee. The fire from the night before had burned out, leaving only white ash in the stove. A kettle sat ready on the counter, and next to it, a plate with 2 pieces of toast. Gabe moved with quiet purpose, like he'd lived half his life in silence. "You can take the bedroom if you want," he said. "I'll stay out here." She looked down at herself. The shirt he'd lent her hung almost to her knees. "I'll be fine on the couch," she said. "I don't want to take your bed." "You need sleep more than I do," he replied simply. Then he pulled on his jacket and nodded toward the door. "I need to get some things from town. Lock up if you hear anything." Amber didn't want him to leave. She didn't want to admit that either. When the door closed and the sound of his motorcycle faded, the house felt too still, like a clock that had stopped ticking. She walked slowly through the small space. Everything in it was neat, like someone trying to keep order in a life that had lost shape. On a shelf, she noticed a photograph turned face down. She picked it up carefully. The picture showed Gabe with a woman and 2 children, smiling in front of what looked like this same house. He looked younger, lighter somehow. The woman had warm eyes, her hair pulled back in a braid. The kids clung to his legs, laughing. Amber set the photo down and backed away. The truth came slowly, like a light through fog. He'd lost them. Whoever they weren't here anymore. She moved to the table and noticed an open Bible, its pages soft from use. Words were underlined in pencil, and notes were scribbled in the margins. One name caught her eye, Pastor Gabriel Knox. Amber's breath caught. Pastor? She whispered it like a question to no one. When Gabe came back an hour later, she was standing by the window, watching dust drift through the light. He set a bag on the counter. "Picked up some food," he said. She turned to him, her heart still pounding with what she'd read. "You were a pastor," she said. He froze for a second. Then he gave a small, quiet nod. "A long time ago." "What happened?" He didn't answer at first. He pulled out a loaf of bread, set it on the counter, then leaned against the wall like the question was heavier than he could carry, standing up straight. "My wife and kids were hit by a drunk driver," he said at last. 3 years ago. I buried them myself. The man who killed them rode with a chapter of the angels." His voice didn't shake, but his hands did. "I thought if I joined them, I could stop others before they did what he did. Maybe even find peace." Amber didn't know what to say. All she could do was listen. He looked at her once, then back down at the floor. "I failed at both," he said. "You didn't fail last night," she whispered. Something flickered across his face. Pain, gratitude, maybe both. He cleared his throat and changed the subject. "There's soup if you're hungry." They ate in silence. Outside, the rain softened into a steady mist. For the first time in years, Amber didn't feel like she was about to be laughed at or judged. She wasn't sure what this strange peace was, but she didn't want it to end. When the light faded, Gabe built a fire. The flames made the walls glow gold, and the crackle filled the spaces where words didn't fit. Amber sat near the hearth with her knees pulled close. Gabe sat across from her, the Bible open in his lap. "You still believe?" she asked quietly. He stared at the fire. "Some days I think I do," he said. "Some days I just hope someone still believes in me." Amber watched the light dance over his face. "I think that counts." He gave her a tired half smile, and for the first time she saw how kind his eyes could be when the pain wasn't winning. Later that night, when she went to the bedroom, she paused by the doorway. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For not being like them." He looked up at her, then down at the fire. "You deserve better than men like that," he said. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the fire's slow crackle and the soft sound of his boots shifting on the floor. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. When dawn came again, the storm was gone. The desert air was clean, the sky pale blue and endless. Gabe stood on the porch, sipping coffee, while Amber watched from the doorway. He didn't look like a monster or a biker or even a broken man. He looked like someone trying to build a life from the ruins. And maybe, just maybe, she thought, she could help him do it. Morning light stretched across the cabin, pale and soft, the color of fresh cream. Amber stood at the small sink, rinsing the dishes from breakfast while Gabe checked something outside with the bike. Every movement she made felt slow, careful, as if too much noise might wake a memory that was better left sleeping. The cabin still felt strange, too neat, too quiet. But there was comfort in that quiet, too. The steady tick of the clock, the smell of coffee lingering in the air, the faint scrape of a chair leg on the floor. After so many nights filled with shouting and laughter that cut like knives, the silence felt like a blessing. When Gabe returned, his boots left small prints of dust near the door. "I'll head into town soon," he said. "Need to pick up fuel and a few things." Amber wiped her hands on a towel. "Do you want me to come?" He shook his head. "Better if you stay. Some of those boys might still be hanging around. I don't want them seeing you." She nodded, understanding even if she didn't like it. "How long will you be gone?" "An hour? Maybe 2. He took his jacket from the peg and slipped it on, the leather bending and creasing like an old friend. When he left, the hum of the motorcycle faded into the distance until there was only the sound of the wind moving through the trees. Amber wandered the small cabin, unsure what to do with herself. She found a broom in the corner and began sweeping, a habit from years working at diners and bars where cleaning was how you stayed invisible. Dust lifted and shimmered in the sunbeams. When she finished, she noticed a loose page had slipped from one of the books on the shelf. She bent to pick it up. It was a torn piece from a church bulletin. The date read 6 years ago, and the name printed beneath the sermon title was the same she'd seen stamped in gold on the Bible cover. Pastor Gabriel Knox. Amber sat down at the table, the paper trembling in her fingers. She turned her gaze toward the pictures on the shelf. The one of his wife and kids still lay face down, but she could see a small corner of it. The curve of a child's hand, a bit of blue sky. She whispered to herself, "He really was a pastor?" For a while, she just sat there, thinking. How did a man go from preaching behind a pulpit to wearing a patch with a skull on it? What kind of grief could twist a life that way? When she finally stood, she moved to the counter and lifted the Bible. The pages were worn and soft. A verse was underlined in pencil. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." She touched the margin where someone had written, "I hope that's true." Her eyes burned. She closed the Bible and set it back gently. By the time Gabe returned, the sky was turning orange with late afternoon. He carried 2 brown paper bags and smelled faintly of motor oil and rain. "You didn't have to clean," he said when he saw the swept floor. "I didn't mind," Amber said. Then, hesitating, she added, "I found something. The bulletin." He paused, setting the bags down. "I figured you might." "You used to preach," she said softly. He nodded, eyes low. "I did. For 10 years. What happened?" Gabe looked toward the window, where the sun lit the edges of the glass. "My family was driving back from a church picnic," he said slowly. "There was a man on a Harley, drunk. He hit them head on." He swallowed hard. "He walked away with a broken leg. My wife and kids didn't." Amber felt her throat tighten. She didn't speak. "I tried to forgive him," Gabe went on. "I prayed, I preached forgiveness, but I couldn't find it. So I quit. Thought maybe if I went into their world, I could make sense of it. Maybe stop someone else from doing what he did." "By joining them?" she asked quietly. He gave a dry, humorless smile. "Sometimes to pull a man out of the fire, you have to stand in the smoke." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Amber asked, "Did it help?" "No," he said. "It made me forget why I ever tried." Amber took a deep breath. "You didn't hurt me last night," she said. "You could have. They wanted you to, but you didn't." "That's not something I do," he said simply. "Then maybe you didn't forget everything. His gaze met hers. For the first time, she saw the faintest flicker of hope behind the weariness in his eyes. They ate dinner quietly. Bread, beans, and soup. The air smelled of thyme and smoke. When the meal was done, Gabe stepped out onto the porch and Amber followed, drawn by the cool night. The stars were just starting to show, one by one, like lanterns lit across the dark. "You ever miss preaching?" she asked. He leaned against the railing. "Every day," he said. "But I don't think the kind of man I became belongs behind a pulpit." "Maybe not the old kind," she said softly, "but the kind that helps people when they're scared, the kind that listens. Maybe that kind belongs there more than ever." He looked at her, surprised by the warmth in her voice. For a moment, he didn't seem like the same man who had sat alone in a dark bar the night before. Then headlights flashed down the road. Gabe stiffened. The sound of an engine echoed off the hills. Amber's heart jumped. "Is it them?" He peered into the dark. "Stay inside." "No," she whispered. "I'm not hiding again." The vehicle slowed, but didn't turn into the drive. It passed by, its taillights glowing red until they vanished. Only then did Gabe relax. He turned to her and said quietly, "They'll come back eventually." She swallowed hard. "Then what?" "Then we decide what kind of people we're going to be," he said. "Running never fixes what's broken, but sometimes standing does." That night, as the fire burned low and the world outside fell still, Amber lay awake, listening to the wind brush against the roof. She thought about everything he'd told her, about his loss, his guilt, his strange way of protecting her. She looked at the jacket hanging by the door, the one that had kept her warm when everything else had turned cold, and realized it meant more than protection. It was a symbol of something she didn't yet have words for. Maybe grace didn't always look like light breaking through clouds. Maybe, she thought, sometimes it wore a torn leather jacket and kept its promises. The night sky was thick with clouds again, the kind that rolled low and gray, promising another storm. Amber stood by the small window, holding a cup of tea. Gabe sat at the table, his Bible open but unread. The tension between them wasn't angry. It was something heavier, like the stillness before thunder. Neither of them spoke about the headlights that had passed the cabin the night before. But both knew what it meant. Their peace was temporary. Gabe finally closed the Bible and rubbed a hand across his face. "They'll come," he said quietly. "It's just a matter of when." Amber turned from the window. "Then let's go first." He looked up, surprised. "Go where?" "Somewhere they can't find us. Somewhere no one knows you or me." He gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "There's nowhere like that, Amber. They got friends in every county." "Then we go somewhere they won't follow," she said, firmer this time. "You said running doesn't fix what's broken, but maybe it gives you time to breathe while you fix it." He studied her for a long moment, the lines of worry deepening around his eyes. Then he nodded slowly. "You're right. We'll ride out before sunrise." They packed in silence. Amber folded what few clothes she had borrowed. Gabe filled a small saddlebag with food and tools. The only sound was the scrape of the chair legs and the soft hiss of wind against the walls. When the first trace of dawn brushed the horizon, they stepped outside. The air smelled of rain and pine. A cool mist clung to the trees. Gabe's motorcycle waited, black and still, the metal slick with dew. He checked the fuel line and gave the kickstand a sharp tap. Amber hesitated on the porch, looking back at the cabin. "You'll come back here someday?" "Maybe," he said. "If we make it through this." She didn't ask what this meant. She already knew. They rode hard and fast down the mountain road. The early light cut through the mist like pale ribbons. Amber clung to Gabe's jacket, her face pressed against his back. The wind tugged at her hair, but she didn't mind. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of the road. Miles passed, fields, low ridges, then the long, flat stretch leading towards the highway. They stopped once at a gas station to fill up. Gabe paid cash and kept his head down. The attendant, an old man with gray stubble, gave them a curious glance but said nothing. When they got back on the bike, Gabe said, "We'll head south for a while. There's a mission house outside Tucson, St. Helena's. The man who runs it used to be my mentor." "A church?" Amber asked. "More like a shelter," he said. "They take in whoever needs help. Nobody asks questions." Amber's heart lifted a little. "That sounds safe." He gave a slow nod. "As close to safe as we're gonna get." By afternoon, dark clouds gathered again. The sky turned the color of wet steel. A few drops fell, then more. Soon the rain came hard and fast. They pulled off under an old gas station awning, the storm roaring above them. Amber shivered, water dripping from her hair. Gabe pulled his jacket over her shoulders without a word. "You'll get soaked," she protested. He just shrugged. "I'm used to it." Thunder cracked somewhere behind the hills. For a while they just stood there, listening to the storm pound the roof. Amber finally spoke, her voice barely above the rain. "You ever think you were being punished?" He turned to her. "For what?" "For living when they didn't." Gabe stared out at the sheets of rain. "Every day," he said. "But maybe that's not how it works. Maybe punishment isn't what we think it is." "What do you mean?" He looked at her then, his eyes dark but steady. "Maybe it's not punishment at all. Maybe it's mercy that hurts." Amber didn't know what to say. The words sank deep into her, slow and heavy. She watched the rain trail down the side of the bike, silver against black. The storm broke as fast as it came. By late afternoon, the sky opened to gold. They rode again, heading south until the desert flattened out into scrub and distant mountains. The air grew warmer, the smell of wet dust thick around them. When the sign for St. Helena's mission appeared, half hidden behind an old oak, Amber almost didn't notice. The building stood small and worn, a faded cross on its roof, its paint peeling in the sun. But it glowed with a quiet, gentle light. Gabe slowed the bike and turned into the gravel lot. A few people were outside, a woman hanging laundry, 2 kids playing with a dog. At the sound of the engine, they looked up, wary but curious. A man stepped out onto the porch. His hair was gray, his shoulders still strong. When he saw Gabe, he stopped cold. Then his face softened into something like relief and surprise. "Gabriel Knox," he said. "Well, I'll be." Gabe took off his helmet and nodded. "Hello, Pastor." Amber climbed off the bike and looked around, unsure if she should speak. Gabe's voice had changed, gentler, almost shy. "This is Amber," he said quietly. "She needs a place to stay. We both do." Pastor Martin studied her face, then Gabe's. Whatever judgment had been, in his eyes vanished. He gave a small smile. "You're both welcome here." Amber felt her throat tighten. The words "welcome here" hit harder than she expected. Inside, the mission smelled of old wood and bread baking. A few women worked in the kitchen, and the sound of children's laughter drifted down the hall. Pastor Martin led them to a small room with 2 cots. "It's not much," he said, "but it's clean." "It's more than enough," Gabe said. When the door closed behind them, Amber sank onto the edge of one of the beds. "You knew him?" she said softly. Gabe nodded. "He was my mentor before. Everything." She looked at him for a long moment. He didn't seem angry. "He believes in grace," Gabe said. "I'm still trying to remember what that feels like." Amber smiled faintly. "Maybe you're not the only one." That evening, they ate with the others in the mission hall. The food was simple: vegetable soup, cornbread, sweet tea. But it tasted like peace. Laughter echoed softly, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Amber didn't feel out of place. As the sun set through the mission's old windows, painting the walls in orange light, Amber glanced at Gabe. He was listening to Pastor Martin speak, his face calm, almost at ease. And for one small, perfect moment, she thought, maybe this is what safety feels like. The next morning rose warm and golden over the desert. The air outside St. Helena's mission smelled of fresh bread and damp earth. Amber stood on the porch, watching sunlight stretch across the gravel yard. For the first time in years, she didn't wake to shouting or fear. Just quiet. Inside, voices murmured and pots clanged. The mission was already alive. Women moved through the kitchen, serving oatmeal and coffee to the early risers. A few men sat by the door, eating in silence. Everyone looked tired but kind. Pastor Martin greeted her with a smile. His eyes were soft but sharp, like someone who had seen both heaven and hard living. "Sleep all right?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Amber said, tucking her hair behind her ear. "Better than I expected." "Good. We believe work heals the soul as much as rest," he said kindly. "Would you like to help in the kitchen?" Amber nodded without thinking. "I'd like that." Gabe was already outside, mending a broken fence post near the garden. He worked quietly, muscles shifting under his shirt, his focus steady. Children played nearby, running barefoot through the dust, shouting with laughter. Now and then, one would stop to stare at the tall man fixing the fence, whispering, "That's the biker who came with the lady." Gabe would only nod in return, a hint of a smile tugging at his mouth. Amber watched from the kitchen window as she washed dishes. There was something almost peaceful about him now, as if working with his hands helped him remember how to breathe again. By noon, she had served 3 pots of soup and laughed twice, something she hadn't done in months. The other women, mostly mothers and widows, accepted her easily. They didn't ask about her weight, her past, or why she'd come. They only said, "You're doing fine, honey," and meant it. At lunch, Pastor Martin stood in the doorway, smiling at the small crowd gathered. "Every soul who walks through this door carries a story," he said. "Some come running from it, others come looking for it again. Either way, God's already waiting." Amber felt her eyes sting. She didn't dare look at Gabe, but she could feel him across the room, standing still and listening. After the meal, she carried a tray of clean bowls to the back. Gabe came in from the yard, dirt on his hands and sweat darkening his shirt. He nodded toward her, quiet as always. "How's the fence?" she asked. "Holding for now," he said. "Kind of like me." She laughed softly. "Well, it's a good start." That afternoon, the two of them helped stack supplies in the storage shed. Amber found herself humming an old tune her grandmother used to sing. Gabe looked up. "That's nice," he said. "It's just something I remember from when things were simpler," she said. "Before I thought life was about what people saw instead of what God sees." He studied her for a moment. "You talk like someone who's been listening," he said. She shrugged. "Maybe I'm learning." When the work was done, they sat on the porch steps, watching the sun drift lower. The sky turned a deep rose color, and the scent of rain was faint in the air. Amber broke the silence first. "You think Pastor Martin knows what you did? About joining the angels?" "He knows everything," Gabe said. "He just doesn't throw it in my face. That's his way of letting me face it myself." Amber nodded slowly. "Seems like a good man," "The best I ever knew," Gabe said softly. "He was the one who told me once, 'When you can't find grace, it finds you anyway.' I didn't believe him then. And now," he gave a faint smile, "now I'm starting to." They sat in the fading light for a while. Somewhere inside, someone played an old piano. The notes were uneven, but sweet. Amber leaned her head against the post beside her, closing her eyes. "It's been a long time since I felt safe," she whispered. "You're safe here," Gabe said. His voice was quiet, but sure. "As long as I'm breathing, you will be." Amber opened her eyes. The honesty in his words stole her breath for a moment. "Thank you," she said. When dinner time came, everyone gathered in the small hall. They shared stew and bread, and Pastor Martin read a short verse about forgiveness. Amber looked down at her bowl, remembering the cruel laughter from the bar, the faces that had watched her humiliation. She wasn't sure she could forgive them yet. But maybe she could start by forgiving herself. After the meal, Gabe lingered by the door, helping clean up. Pastor Martin placed a hand on his shoulder. "I knew you'd come back someday," the pastor said softly. Gabe's voice was low. "I don't know if I deserve to be here." Martin smiled. "None of us do. That's why grace is grace." Later, when everyone was asleep, Amber stepped outside. The night air was cool, and the stars glimmered bright over the desert. Gabe sat by the fence, looking out toward the hills. She joined him quietly. "You ever think about going back to preaching?" she asked. He chuckled, shaking his head. "I can't even preach to myself most days." "Maybe that's the kind people need most," she said softly. "The kind who've fallen and still believe they can stand again." He looked at her then, his eyes warm in the moonlight. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe you're right." They sat together until the night deepened, and the crickets began to sing. Neither spoke again, but something had shifted between them. Something fragile and new, like hope taking its first breath. And for the first time in years, Gabe thought maybe the road ahead didn't have to lead back into darkness. Days passed gently at St. Helena's Mission. The rhythm of life there was simple. Morning chores, shared meals, evening prayers. For Amber, every sunrise felt like a second chance to breathe again. She worked in the kitchen most days, stirring soup, washing dishes, and learning to bake bread from one of the older women. Her laughter, once small and cautious, started to sound easy again. She liked the smell of flour on her hands, the sound of people thanking her for meals. The kindness of strangers was something she wasn't used to, and it softened her in ways she hadn't expected. Gabe spent his days in the yard, helping fix old motorcycles the mission used for deliveries. A group of teens often gathered around him, boys who had nowhere else to go. They watched as he showed them how to rebuild engines and fix chains, patient with every question. He rarely smiled, but when he did, it was like sunlight breaking through clouds. At lunch, Amber sometimes brought him lemonade, and they'd sit under the mesquite tree near the fence. The conversations were never long, but they felt important. "You ever think about leaving here?" she asked one afternoon. "Sometimes," he said, "but not until the past stops chasing." She looked down at her hands. "I know that feeling." He gave a faint smile. "Then maybe we both belong here for now." That Sunday, the mission hall filled with people. Pastor Martin stood at the front, reading from the Gospel of Luke. The light from the windows fell across the faces of the gathered. Men, women, children, all listening. "Grace doesn't come to the perfect," the pastor said. "It comes to the broken who still dare to hope." Amber's heart caught on the words. She felt like the sermon was meant for her alone. Gabe sat at the back, his hands folded, his head bowed. When the service ended, he stayed behind, staring at the cross. Amber waited outside until he finally joined her. "You were quiet today," she said. "Some things hit harder than I expect," he admitted. "Like what?" He hesitated, then said, "Hearing about grace from someone who still believes I deserve it." Amber touched his arm lightly. "Maybe that means you do." For a moment, he didn't move. Then he gave a slow nod. Later that week, a small thunderstorm rolled over the hills. Rain tapped against the mission roof, and the air smelled clean. The kitchen buzzed with laughter as the women baked biscuits for dinner. Amber's hair was messy, her cheeks pink from the oven's heat. When she turned, she saw Gabe standing at the doorway, watching her with a quiet smile. "You look happy," he said. "I am," she said softly. "I forgot what that felt like." He leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "Happiness suits you." She laughed and tossed him a biscuit. "So does smiling. You should try it more often." He caught it easily, smiling for real this time. "Maybe I will." That night, as the mission quieted, Amber couldn't sleep. She wandered to the chapel, where candles flickered low. Gabe was there, sitting in the back pew. He didn't turn when she entered. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. She shook her head and sat beside him. The silence between them felt easy now, not heavy like before. After a long pause, he said, "You know what I used to pray for? A reason to keep breathing, that's all. Not forgiveness, not joy, just one reason." Amber looked at him, her eyes shining in the candlelight. "Did you find it?" He met her gaze and, for a heartbeat, held it. "Maybe I'm starting to." She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't need to. They sat there until dawn crept through the windows, washing the chapel in soft gold. When the first bird sang outside, Amber whispered, "It's a new day." Gabe nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, "and maybe this time we'll get it right." The days at St. Helena's drifted by in peace, until the morning two strangers rode in on motorcycles. Amber noticed them first from the kitchen window. They wore leather vests marked with the same emblem she'd seen that terrible night at the bar. Her heart skipped. She set down the spoon she was holding and called softly, "Gabe." He was outside, fixing a broken wheelbarrow. When he saw the men, his expression hardened. The old calm vanished, replaced by the quiet alertness of someone who had lived too long in danger. The bikers dismounted and walked toward the mission yard, pretending to ask for food. Their eyes swept over everyone, sharp and searching. Pastor Martin came out to greet them, but Gabe stepped between them before a word was said. "They're not hungry," he said quietly. The taller biker smirked. "Still playing hero, preacher?" Amber froze at this word. The men laughed as if they'd just said something funny, but Gabe didn't move. "You've got 5 minutes to leave," he said. The smaller biker spat on the ground. "Viper wants you back," he said. "He says you took something that belongs to him." Gabe's voice was steady. "Tell Viper I'm done, and tell him I'm not coming back." The taller man's grin faded. "He'll come himself then." "Maybe he should," Gabe said, and took a slow step forward. His size alone was enough to make them flinch. They backed toward their bikes, glaring. "You can't hide forever," one called out. "Wasn't planning to," Gabe said. The engines roared back to life, and the men sped off, leaving a trail of dust behind. When the sound faded, Pastor Martin came closer. "They'll be back," he said quietly. "I know," Gabe replied, "but not today." Amber came outside, her face pale. "You think they'll hurt us?" Gabe looked at her, then shook his head. "Not if I can stop them." Pastor Martin touched his shoulder. "You can't fight a whole gang, son." "I'm not fighting," Gabe said. I'm ending it." That night, Amber couldn't eat. The memory of the laughter at the bar came rushing back, the humiliation, the fear, the way Gabe had stood between her and them. She found him sitting by the mission gate, staring out into the dark. "They'll come for you," she said quietly. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm giving the police everything I have on them. Names, deals, all of it." She stared at him in disbelief. "That's suicide, Gabe." He looked up at the stars. "It's the right thing. I joined them to stop the pain, and I only made it worse. This is my chance to make something right." Amber felt her throat tighten. "You don't have to do it alone." He turned to her then, and for the first time, there was fear in his eyes. Not for himself, but for her. "If anything happens," he said softly, "promise me you'll run." Amber shook her head. "I'm done running." For a moment, neither spoke. The desert wind whispered through the mission yard, carrying the scent of rain. Then Gabe reached for her hand just long enough to squeeze it once, firm and sure. Whatever storm was coming, they would face it together. The next morning, the sun rose over St. Helena's like any other. Children played near the garden, and the smell of biscuits drifted from the kitchen. But something felt different. Tight, uneasy. Gabe could feel it before anyone said a word. He spent the morning loading boxes of supplies into the mission's old van. Amber worked beside him, her hands steady, her smile forced. Both knew the peace was cracking. The men who'd come yesterday were just the first ripple before the storm. By noon, a line of police cars appeared on the dirt road. Dust trailed behind them like smoke. Gabe's chest went still. "They're here," he said quietly. Pastor Martin stepped outside, his brow furrowed. "What's this about?" A uniformed officer walked up, flanked by two men in plain clothes. "We're looking for Gabriel Knox," he said. "We received an anonymous tip he's connected to a kidnapping." Amber's breath caught. "What?" The officer's gaze shifted toward her. "A woman reported she was taken against her will from a bar north of here. The man involved matches his description." "That's not true!" she cried. "He saved me!" But the words tangled in the dry air. The officers didn't lower their hands from their belts. Gabe didn't resist. He only nodded once and held out his wrists. "Let them hear your story," Pastor Martin said softly, his voice trembling. "The truth will hold." As they led Gabe towards the car, Amber ran after them. "You can't take him," she shouted. "He's not what they say." Gabe turned to her, calm even now. "It's all right, Amber," he said. "Do what I couldn't. Trust." Tears blurred her eyes as the car door slammed shut and the convoy drove away in a cloud of dust. The sound of engines faded into the hills, leaving her with nothing but silence. That night, the mission hall was too quiet. No laughter, no singing, only whispers. Some of the board members gathered in the pastor's office, their voices low. When Amber entered, the room fell silent. "We've decided it's best if you leave for now," said one of the board members, a tall woman with gray hair and careful words. "Until the situation clears up, the mission can't afford trouble." Amber's heart broke. "He was helping you, helping everyone." Pastor Martin looked pained but didn't argue. "Sometimes faith means walking through confusion," he said. "This will pass." Amber packed her few belongings that night. Her hands shook as she folded the clothes Gabe had lent her. She paused at the window, staring at the empty space where his motorcycle used to sit. Outside, the desert wind whispered through the yard. She thought about leaving, about starting over somewhere else. But the idea felt hollow. Everything good she'd found was tied to him. She took one last look at the mission lights and whispered, "Please, God, don't let this be how it ends. At dawn, she rented a small trailer outside town with what little money she had saved. The rooms were quiet and cold, but she left a lamp burning through the night. It was the only light she could bear. 2 days later, there was a knock at the door. Gabe stood there, his face bruised, his knuckles raw, but his eyes alive. "They dropped the charges," he said. "Someone inside the club talked. It's almost over, Amber. One more step." She let him in without a word and wrapped her arms around him. For a long time, neither spoke. But deep down, both knew this fight wasn't finished. The hardest part was still to come. Amber woke before dawn to an empty trailer and a note on the table. "Stay here, I'll finish this." Her hands shook as she read it. She knew exactly what he meant. Gabe was going to face Viper, and he didn't plan to come back until it was over. Without thinking, she grabbed her coat and ran to the bus stop. The desert wind stung her face, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. The bus carried her north, toward the place she'd sworn never to see again, the bar where her humiliation had begun. When she pushed open the door, time folded. The same cracked lights, the same smell of smoke and fear. The men froze when they saw her. Viper smirked. "Well, look who came crawling back." Amber stood tall, voice steady. "I came to end this." Before he could answer, the door burst open. Gabe stepped inside, soaked from the rain, eyes blazing. "It ends tonight," he said. Viper laughed. "You think you can save her again?" But Gabe wasn't there to talk. He crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbing Viper's jacket and slamming him against the bar. Chaos exploded. Shouts, fists, breaking glass. Then sirens wailed outside. Police stormed in, guns drawn. Gabe raised his hands. "They're yours," he said, nodding toward the gang. "I got the proof." Amber ran to him as the officers cuffed Viper. Gabe's arms wrapped around her, and for the first time, the danger was behind them. The police lights painted the wet pavement red and blue. Gabe sat on the curb, wrists bruised but free, while officers led Viper and his men into the waiting cars. Amber stood beside him, rain running down her face, though she couldn't tell if it was rain or tears. When the last siren faded, the world felt strangely still. Gabe looked at her, exhaustion etched deep into his features. "It's over," he said softly. She knelt beside him. "You did it." He gave a tired smile. "We did it." At the station, the detectives thanked him for the evidence. Recordings, papers, everything that tied the gang to their crimes. "You've helped more people than you know," one officer said. Gabe only nodded, his eyes distant. Hours later, when he finally walked out into the dawn, Amber was waiting on the steps, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to him and smiled through trembling lips. "You didn't think I'd leave, did you?" He chuckled quietly. "Didn't dare hope you'd stay." They drove back to the mission together. Pastor Martin met them at the door, tears shining in his eyes. "You came home," he said. Inside, the others clapped and cheered softly. Amber's heart swelled as she looked at Gabe, tired, scarred, but free. For the first time in years, neither of them was running. The past had lost its hold, and the future waited with open arms. Weeks later, the mission buzzed with excitement as a new sign went up over a freshly painted storefront. Second Chance Kitchen. Amber stood beside Gabe, watching sunlight gleam on the letters. Inside, the smell of soup and bread filled the air. Former inmates, single mothers, and wanderers all worked side by side, laughing as they served meals to anyone who walked through the door. "This place," Amber said softly, "it's what we were meant to build." Gabe nodded, smiling faintly. "Not a punishment," he said. "A beginning." Pastor Martin blessed the kitchen, his voice warm and proud. "Grace looks like this," he told them. "Broken people feeding the hungry, healed people helping the lost." As the crowd applauded, Amber looked at Gabe through tears. "We made it," she whispered. He squeezed her hand gently. "By grace," he said. Thanksgiving morning came bright and cool. The scent of roasted turkey and sweet rolls drifted from Second Chance Kitchen, where laughter filled every corner. Amber moved among the tables, ladling soup, her apron dusted with flour. Around her sat families, strangers, and the forgotten, each with a plate, each with a story. Gabe stood by the door, helping an old man with his coat. When their eyes met across the room, Amber smiled. For once, her smile wasn't shy or uncertain. It was whole. A little girl tugged at Amber's sleeve. Her curls were wild, her cheeks round with joy. "You're the prettiest lady I ever saw," the child said matter-of-factly. Amber froze, her throat tightening. The words hit her heart like sunlight after rain. She bent down and hugged the girl. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. Gabe had heard. He walked over slowly, wiping his hands on a towel. "She's right, you know," he said softly. Amber laughed, tears spilling freely now. "You told me that once." He smiled, eyes warm. "Yeah, but this time, you believe it." The afternoon faded into gold. When the last guests left, Amber and Gabe stepped outside. The air was cool and full of the smell of wood smoke. Above them, the sign for Second Chance Kitchen glowed under the porch light. Amber leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" "Every day," he said, "and I thank God we didn't stop halfway." As evening settled, they stood in the quiet street. Two souls once lost, now home at last. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.